Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined by Dr. Craig Considine, author and sociologist, who is joining us to discuss the topic of social justice and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, Dr. Considine once believed the Muslim Brotherhood claimed to advocate for social justice, so he defended and supported the Islamist organization. He then learned through bitter experience that the Brotherhood's advocacy and activism for justice is but political theater and propaganda, concealing a very different, dangerous agenda. Now, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Craig Considine here. Can we begin by having you tell us about your background in academic writings on Islam, Muslims, Muhammad, and the like?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Background, grew up in Needham, Massachusetts, Irish, Italian with a splash of English and Scottish, also Catholic, went to public school, but also had my fair share of Catholic indoctrination at St. Sebastian's Church in Needham. When it came time to go to college, I went to American University in Washington, D.C., and I linked up with Dr. Akbar Ahmed, who was the former High Commissioner from the UK, from Pakistan to the UK. And Dr. Ahmed introduced me to interfaith dialogue through the prism of international relations. And this was 2003, 2004. So the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq had just happened. And I became passionate about the interfaith movement. And I worked with him extensively on numerous projects. After AU, I went to Royal Holloway, University of London. That's where I did my master's. I got a MSc in international relations. And then I moved on to Trinity College Dublin, Department of Sociology, where I got my Ph.D. In terms of my books, I've written 8 books now. My 8th is about to be published in a couple of months, and they've largely focused on Islam in the West, also Christian and Muslim relations. And what I've been trying to do is to bridge the perceived gap between these entities, the West and Islam, through the prism of Christian and Muslim relations. So this is where my efforts have been at over the last 15 years or so.
Right, thank you. Now, in your pursuit of bridging that sort of interfaith gap, how is it that you found yourself working, maybe not working, but in contact and, kind of advancing the sort of agenda of Islamist organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood and their various networks?
So it was never a conscious effort by me. I think that I need to make that clear. I didn't necessarily know what I was completely mixed up in. It happened without really my conscious acknowledgement of it, kind of naive in a way. But it really kicked off when I moved to Houston in 2016, when I picked up a position at Rice University. And at the time, this was the 2016 election. Islamophobia was a hot button issue. And this was of concern to me. I thought I was combating it. And slowly but surely, various organizations reached out to me. And it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations. Really, I've interacted with a plethora of organizations over the years. And I was interested in especially CARE's civil rights mantra, if you want to call it that. That's obviously what they pitch themselves as. And that was something I'm interested in. And I'm obviously still interested in civil rights, right? I think this is where in the United States, This is a constitutional right. But at the time, I didn't necessarily know that there was a lot of political baggage behind it. So that's how it started.
All right. Well, thank you. Now, this is an interesting topic for me personally as well. So I come from a Muslim background and I am an ex-Muslim. So I understand how a lot of these political ideas, especially ideas that claim to promote and advocate for things like social justice and um, anti-Islamophobia sorts of messages are very attractive. Now, do you find this is a question from Sam Westrop, the Islamist watch director here at MEF? He asks, did you find that interfaith dialogue is exploited by Islamist groups? That is, Islamists using interfaith bodies as a means to legitimize their claim to represent Western Muslims the same way they might by propagating these ideals of social justice?
I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think it's part of a strategy to soften the playing field. Interfaith is a very easy inroad. I can't imagine any sane person being anti-interfaith given how diverse our country is. But in my own personal experience, in working with various networks that are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, and then obviously the entire kind of uh, network that is not really affiliated with it, but that's there. Like I found that the interfaith card wasn't really sincere, and that it was really about a political agenda. And yeah, that's really what turned me off, especially when I got uh, deep into it and folks started trying to convert me. Like if this is, I was always thinking, like, if this is about interfaith, then you should respect the fact that I'm Catholic. That's how I was raised. And I am, speaking highly of Muhammad and writing books about Muhammad. But if this is about interfaith, then why are you trying to convert me? So that was one of the kind of switches that went off in my head that started making me think that the whole interfaith thing was a sly political strategic maneuver. And it honestly lowered my trust in the people that I was working with.
So that's interesting. You, as a Catholic, to some extent, were able to kind of get embedded into some of these Islamist groups and their activities. It's a little more understandable for somebody who grew up, in Islam, somebody who is a Muslim. Um, but how, can you speak more about how these Islamist groups are able to recruit non-Muslims and sort of fellow travelers to their Islamist causes?
Honestly, it's mainly through academia. It's through a lot of the woke terminology, critical race theory, decolonization, social justice, anti-racism. I think a lot of it is happening in academia. And I'm afraid that a lot of students around the country are not even really aware of exactly what they are supporting and why they're even supporting it. I can say, like, I was never overtly recruited. I never felt that, but it was always subliminal. It was always on these like left-leaning liberal talking points, which are, kind of shallow in a way. There's a lot of virtue signaling in this, like who couldn't be against social justice? Who shouldn't be against anti-racism? Of course, we should be against these things, but it's not as clear cut. It's never that clear cut. So
Right. And
yeah,
I suspect that's kind of by design in a sense.
of course,
Who wants to be
yeah,
the guy, as you said, who wants to be the guy who's railing against interfaith or against open dialogue between the faiths, and as they would have you believe, but realistically, what they mean is the guy railing against interfaith might just have, in your case, qualms against what the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamists are trying to do.
exactly.
Now, We have a question from the Middle East Forum's president, Daniel Pipes here. He says, thank you, Dr. Considine, for joining our podcast. I have two questions. First, was there a specific event that changed your outlook? And are there lessons that you can draw from your experience?
I wouldn't say, Mr. Pipes, that there was one specific event. I think it was a multitude of events. In 2018, I started traveling to the UAE as part of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies under Sheikh bin Baya. And this is part of the early efforts to normalize relations between the UAE and Israel. And that's when I started getting backlash from individuals who are either directly linked to the Muslim Brotherhood or their sympathizers and their allies. And this obviously is rooted in a deeper anti-Israel, anti-Semitic ideology that we find within the Muslim Brotherhood. And then, of course, I traveled to the UAE for years, and I went to the inauguration of the Abrahamic Family House, which was monumental, one of the great professional experiences I've ever had. And it's interesting too, like Hatem Bazian, I'm sure everyone knows who Hatem Bazian is. He recently commented over social media on X that I started changing when I went to the UAE. And he's actually right, because I started listening really for the first time to Jewish elders and to Muslim elders who were committed to a vision of the Middle East that was about peace. And that had a massive, massive impact on me. And I'll never forget it. And then also in 2020, when I published my book under Blue Dome Press, The Humanity of Muhammad, a Christian View, it became quite popular, and it got around into the public and into political spheres, and it was almost like it was too successful, and they didn't like the fact that I was bridging the gap between Islam and the West, this perceived gap that we're talking about, and they started pulling back, or they started not pulling back their support for me, but also attacking me.
And real
Right.
quick,
So there,
just not to interrupt you, when you say they, you mean the Islamists, right? You mean like the
yeah,
Brotherhood related groups?
yes, yeah, but it's bigger than the Islamists and the Brotherhood too. It's like as we were talking earlier, like there are so many organizations and sections of the wider Muslim American community that are buying into the ideology, and they don't even know it. That's what I think. They don't even know it. So there was a lot of different things. Also in 2021, like I started getting hacked on social media quite regularly, to the point where the authorities had to get involved. I can't share too many examples about this, but I think this is largely due to the work that I was doing with the Hizmet movement, the Gulen movement, which is obviously the arch nemesis of Erdogan in Turkey, which we all know has been promoting Islamist and Brotherhood antics for years now. And then also getting pushback from entities in Pakistan and the Jamaat-e-Islami, which we also know is part of the Brotherhood network, right? So like there's a bunch of different elements that kind of came together and created this perfect storm for me, where I really had to think inward, like what is happening, why is it happening, and who is attacking me. And I'm not an idiot, and I figured out who was attacking me, and that's why I started saying there's no chance I can support this.
That's uh that's so interesting, but it's also so telling that it seems like the crux of everybody sort of turning on you was you writing a book about interfaith and bridging the gap between Islam and Christianity. Um, we have a few questions coming in from some attendees here. I'll start with this one from Ken Cohen. What will be the most effective avenues for full court press education of misinformed students and others this year? Others, I assume, being the fellow travelers that you sort of mentioned who don't know what sort of service they're providing to the people whose goals are advancing.
I must say, Mr. Cohen, I am very concerned with this challenge, especially in academia. And I wish I had a clear-cut, easy, digestible remedy for it, but I'm afraid I don't. And I think academia is so deeply embedded in far left ideology, especially Marxism, which is obviously, I think, if anyone knows what the Islamist agenda and the Brotherhood is all about, it banks on Marxist divide and conquer, black and white type of ideology. So it starts with academia, but not in the classroom. I think it starts with the upper echelons of these institutions getting proper leadership and making sure that hiring practices don't contribute to echo chambers and safe spaces. We need to get back to getting critical thinking into the classrooms and into academia. And then also, and this is something I'm very concerned about, and it's all part of the Marxist Islamist kind of takeover of academia. We are, I'm a professor at Rice. There is so much anti-American sentiment within academia at large. Rice does a lot of great things, but there's also a lot of we have experts uh, teaching the youth to hate their country. That's suicidal. That's like civilizational suicide. That's national suicide. This country obviously has a lot to work on. Every country does, but it's still one of the best countries in the world, if not the best country in the world. So it does start in academia, but I'm not sure that there's an easy remedy here. And I'm very concerned also about the fall. Very concerned about the fall.
So, inside of academia, can you speak a little bit about where you see the sources of some of these professors and academics who are misguiding these youth? Do you have experience or any understanding that these professors are funded from foreign governments or from nonprofits or for groups like CARE?
Well, I think this is something that's been popping up post 7 October world about where money is coming from in through the foreign realm to different universities in the US. I know like China and Qatar are two of the major funders. I don't know exactly where to pinpoint it, and I'm not kind of throwing my colleagues under the bus and saying that they're all, bought. I don't think it's that, but certainly the foreign money has a huge element to this. I think anyone that would dismiss that is just being devoid of reality. But I think it's more of a structural, fundamental, deeply ingrained issue within Western academia that we've gone too far left. We've gone too far left. Like in my classes, like I promote civic values and religious pluralism and tolerance to a certain degree. And it's oftentimes it's like I'm speaking to a wall that they just don't even understand why these things are important. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, the right to own property, the right to vote, the right to assembly. All of these things don't seem to matter I'm not trying to paint a wide brush on all students, but it is very real in academia. And that is very, very concerning to me. It's all this super left wing Marxist, utopian ideal, like let's just destroy everything. And then voila, we're going to have a eureka moment and everything is going to sort itself out. I mean, it's honestly a little mad. And it's very difficult to operate in these spaces.
All right, thank you. Now we have another question here from Sam Westrop. He asks, what hope is there, in your opinion, for anti-Islamist Muslims to take back their communities from radical control? And how can non-Muslims, government, and others improve their chances?
Another tough question. And I hate to be a pessimist because I'm not really, but I'm not sure that there is a ton of hope, to be honest. Even in my own work, I've been working with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community for years, since 2015, since I moved to Houston. And when 7 October happened, I was surprised at the position that they took, because they had been advocating for years for interfaith dialogue. And they also have a chapter in Haifa in Israel, in northern Israel. And it was like, to see them basically adopt the position of the Islamist was shocking to me. It literally shocked me, and I was hurt, and the connection with them was dropped off. And I had hope for them. I really did. I had hope for them, because their values aligned with my values as a Christian, but also my values as an American. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all the things that I mentioned in the last question. Even the Hizmet movement, the Gulen movement, they also stand by these similar principles through my experience with them, which has been extensive. And they haven't been saying much of anything, which is de facto nothing. You're not supporting or doing anything. So I honestly don't know where the American Muslim community is going. And I've told people, even online, like Ahmed Rehab, the president of the CARE Chicago chapter, he was crapping on me on social media. And I was like, literally, I'm afraid for y'all. I don't know where y'all are going. You're putting yourselves on an island, and it's not a good island. You're putting all your eggs into one basket. Super left wing, and it's not it. I don't think it's good. And I think what we're seeing too, if I can add a little political dynamic here, we're seeing the far left politicians in the squad. They're losing their elections. They're not even getting to the election. They're losing their primaries. So I think folks are losing touch in the American Muslim community with just everyday kind of Americans, the kind of neutral, moderate, they can maybe swing both ways. They're losing touch, unfortunately.
All right. Well, thank you. Now, you mentioned earlier in this interview about your visit to the United Arab Emirates. We have a question here from Sarah, forgive me if I butchered this, Sarah Muruwar, who asks, the United Arab Emirates condemns the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Why is it that the United States is not able to follow up with this discernment?
Well, because I think that the Muslim Brotherhood is deeply ingrained into the Democratic Party. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that, from the grassroots level, to Rashida Tlaib, to Ilhan Omar, to people around the Biden administration, or apparently Harris, who's apparently running the country now, as well. So I think that has a big part to do with it. I think the Republican Party, and this is one of the reasons why I'm actually moving towards the Republican Party, because they're very clear. They're very clear on this issue, that this movement, this Islamist movement, whatever you want to call it, is not good for this country. It's not. And their rejection of the Abraham Accords, to me, is maddening, because that is about peace. And you cannot, they try to politicize it. They try to say it's about throwing the Palestinians under the bus. Let me give you a quick example. The second to last time I was there, I was giving a talk at New York University, and I was getting a tour of Qasr al-Watan. And I was walking around in the Grand Hall, and there was a Jewish there was a Jewish couple there. And this Jewish man came up to me. He said, "Can you take a picture of my wife and I?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I didn't know he was Jewish at the time, but when I got his phone, I saw Hebrew. And I said, "Oh, are you Jewish? Are you from Israel?" Obviously, probably. And he's like, "This is amazing." I never ever would have thought that we would be in the UAE. We were in Abu Dhabi. I never thought we would be in Abu Dhabi 2 years ago. Like, how are we so devoid of reality where something like the Abraham Accords isn't a good thing? It just blows my mind. It's so hyper political right now that people are just not even understanding that peace is good. Peace is good.
And no, I think you're totally right. The hyper politicization and what you kind of mentioned earlier about some of the support, if not all of the support for these Islamist organizations being embedded inside of modern left-wing ideologies, certainly the kind they teach on campuses. Now, speaking of that, you may or may not have seen recently some of the buzz in the press about the pick for the Kamala Harris campaign's Vice President Tim Walz awarding $100,000 to a Islamist leader who, among other things, he did not condemn October 7th. He has been on the record praising Hitler. Iman Assad Zaman is his name. What can you say about that? What can you say about the unwillingness of people to not separate these things and still just blindly kind of vote for their politics?
I mean, honestly, Mr. Walls, he served, though he's been lying about his service. Let me say this bluntly, as a white dude. I feel like he's just trying to be the good white dude. Like a good white person just supports Muslims. Like that's anti-racism. That is what makes America better. And he doesn't even know who he's working with. Like, I will say I was guilty of that. Being naive, being a good person. I'd like to think of myself as a good person, like I'm trying to do good, but I was duped. And I think he was absolutely duped. And he had no idea about the obvious trail behind this imam. And then we splinter it down to Ilhan Omar, who met with Erdogan, and some of her blatant anti-American Jew hatred comments. There's no place for that in this country. There's no place. So I think it's part of this woke ideology. It's like to be a good person, you just got to support every minority group or whatever you want to call it, minority or religion, and like you just have to do it. And if you don't do it, you're racist. And I've come to learn the hard way that that is a bunch of BS.
Right. It's through this sort of critical race, critical identity lens of everything is seen through the lens of victim, victimizer, oppressed, oppressee,
It's Marxism. I
and
mean, read Marx. I mean, he laid it out.
no,
Oppressor versus the oppressed.
during your time while you were kind of uh, I never know how to phrase this, but let's just say in the service of some of these Islamist groups, did you see that sort of ideology explicitly manifest in groups like CARE or in other Islamist groups? Or was it something kind of later on that started meshing itself with the current political climate?
Yeah, it came later when I started getting backlash, and I think a lot of that had to do with my work in the UAE. When I started getting backlash, I started investigating who these groups were, why they may not like me, and then this kind of big labyrinth just came in front of me, and all these connections were just being uh, showing themselves, and they became very apparent. But a lot of my journey had to do with just being a product of Western academia. Like a lot, especially as a sociologist. Like I spent a lot of time in the social sciences, and a lot of the social sciences are about this kind of anti-West. The West is bad, white people are bad, Christians are bad, nuclear families are bad. I mean, it's kind of mad, and like, geez, if I was a genius or something, I would have been able to see through it. But I was young, but thank God the light bulb went off, and now it's almost like a different world, honestly. Like once I saw it was more about Marxism than anything. Once I saw Marxism and I saw how deeply ingrained it was everywhere, oof, I mean, it's a bit scary, and it really transformed me. And then I started realizing that the Islamists are banking on Marxists and their sympathizers to push all this stuff.
Right, thank you. Now, I see that we have reached the end of our time here. I don't want to keep you any longer. I don't know if you have any other obligations here, but we have plenty of questions coming in,
Go ahead, let's do some.
more
Yeah,
than I have time to read them quickly enough in time. But if you have a few moments, I'd love to continue for a moment.
please.
Right. Well, thank you. Um, so, internationally, the Muslim Brotherhood seems to be in decline, but it still feels like in the United States that the Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups exert the most influence as Muslim community institutions. And I think you kind of touched on this with our discussion on academia and the left and all this woke stuff, but why do you think that is that they still have such prominence in the States?
I think a lot of it has to do with how deeply connected they are to the Democratic Party. And a lot of the talking points that you see from Democratic leaders from the very top are filtering down and filtering up. So I think that's a huge part of it. I'd also like to push back on this idea that the Muslim Brotherhood is declining internationally. Like I'm not sure that's true. What we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years, especially since the signing of the Abraham Accords, is Qatar is an increasingly influential entity in international relations. And unfortunately, they're right smack in the middle of the issue in Israel, unfortunately. And we've known that they are propping up Muslim Brotherhood related entities in the United States and around the world. Al Jazeera is obviously doing a great job of controlling the narrative, especially among the youth in this country. What we see in Bangladesh recently as well. I mean, no one's talking about that either. The role that the Muslim Brotherhood played in the recent crisis in Bangladesh, and obviously, Hamas is doing its thing, and like that's obviously linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Turkey is doing their thing. Egypt is kind of wavering right now. I'm not sure what Egypt is doing, but I'm not sure that they're losing influence internationally. I really don't. And I think in this country, they're flourishing. And it's not just because of Muslims, it's because of how well Muslims have spread propaganda. And by Muslims, I mean these organizations and in mosques and in their centers and in their organizations, how they've successfully politicized everything. And it's not even about Islam anymore. It's not about spirituality. It's not about, connecting to God. It's none of that. It's all politics. And they're all Democrats for the most part, which I think at this point in time is not a good thing. It really isn't.
It is a interesting dynamic that yes, politically they seem to want to align themselves with Democrats when you make this distinction, of course, that they're not all religious Muslims, but conservative Islam is very different than what the Democratic Party has to offer. But it seems to be a
Yeah.
very convenient vehicle to get their ideas across. Now, on that note, I wouldn't put you into this group, but would you say that there are non-Muslim Islamists, in other words, people who advance the goals and ambitions of Islamist groups while not being Muslim themselves?
Absolutely. Um, and as a college professor and someone who follows academia very closely, knowing what groups like the Muslim Brotherhood care SJP, Muslim American Society, ISNA, they're all pushing left-wing talking points, decolonization, critical race theory, social justice, all this stuff. And this is what the youth, a big chunk of the youth in this country, like this is what they think is right. And if you're not for it, then you're racist. Or somehow you're like not with the program.
Mm.
And to be a white person uh, pushing these things in the classroom, you get a lot of pushback, a lot of pushback. And like here we are, like I'm at a point now where pushing civic values, basic American values. And I'm all for diversity, but like people need to buy in. People need to buy in and realize how good they have it in this country. You know, my next book that's coming out, Beyond Dialogue, Building Bonds with Christians and Muslims, I look at all the horrific incidences throughout history and in the modern world. Christians are a massively persecuted group in the world. Look at Nigeria, look at Pakistan, even countries like Saudi Arabia. And when you bring this up to the youth and to students, it's like they're like, there's no way, because they're Christian. And they probably think Christian is white because they're American and they've been programmed to think this way. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think it's multifaceted. A lot of it does start with education, but a lot of it starts with our political leaders. And I'm afraid the Democratic Party, not to say that the Republican Party is perfect either, but the Democratic Party has, I think, lost the plot.
Now, when you have these discussions in your classes, even just the very basic bare bones civic discussions, not pertaining to Islam or Islamism or faith or theology, uh, are your students generally receptive? Do they push back? Are they how do they feel about that?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's a lot of brilliant students at Rice who I think get the importance of these constitutional rights and values, and they understand the importance of freedom of speech. They understand the values that are deeply ingrained in the society, but even with the issue of freedom of speech, you know, like even saying something like "I'm for controlled migration," or I want to be I want to vote accordingly so we can defend the borders. Like that is perceived by a lot of people as like racist, right? Or even on my social media lately, I've been pushing back against the Muslim Brotherhood, and a lot of Muslim students who have been in my classes, and a lot of Muslims, the Jonathan Browns and the Nathan Leans of the world, are now saying I'm racist because I'm calling out a a movement and an ideology that anyone with a sane mind would understand is not good for this country. It's not good for this country because it's fundamentally opposing basic values that were entrenched in the 18th century. So it's a tough navigation. You know, a lot of the times I just feel like I'm talking to the wall, unfortunately.
Now, when you can get some of these younger students to understand the importance of Western civilization and the American political system and the freedoms and the Constitution that we all enjoy, from there to be able to get them to understand why those things are important and need to be defended against the threats they face, uh, that's got to be a challenge considering that the other side, the so to speak, the woke side has kind of said that these things are all bad and that who cares if, let's say, the Islamists have their way and their these beloved freedoms and values we express are in danger. How do you navigate that?
I mean, I try to emphasize individualism as much as possible. You know, I think a lot of this identity politics stuff is forcing young people and everyone really into tribes, into communitarianism. So if you look a certain way or if you believe a certain way, you have to think a certain way, which is really the antithesis of what the American experience is really all about, or experiment, if I should say that. So I'm trying to teach just individualism. And this goes back to the Marxism thing I was talking about. We have to start molding, shaping, teaching individuals to think independently, to think critically, and not to be enslaved by identity politics. I think this is one of the greatest challenges that we have. Because what we're seeing in America, it's like white versus everything that's not white, and even Jews are now being thrown into the white category, which I think is questionable to begin with.
The white colonizer category of all things too.
Like I'm Irish and Italian. When students are like, "You're white," like you're guilty of colonization. I'm like, my God, you have no clue what you're talking about. Like especially in Ireland. Like I've done my ancestral genealogical history. I'm a pseudo scholar on Irish history. And to accuse me of being guilty, like I'm somehow responsible for white supremacy in America is absolutely ridiculous. But that's where we're at. And if I said this, oftentimes I can't say this in class. I cannot say this in class because it would create a massive ruffle. And like this is also part of the issue, just the freedom of speech, like just being able to think critically. Like I'm not enslaved to my identity politics. I am me. I have my own lived experience. I was raised a certain way. I know what my history is. I have values. I have principles. These are the things that I should be judged upon, not my ethnicity or my race.
How far we've fallen. Now, I don't want to keep you too long here, so I've got a couple more. Um, I wanted to ask, will other Islamist groups fully replace the Brotherhood in the West as Muslim leaders? Modern Salafis certainly seem to be gaining ground, as do various South Asian Sunni Islamists. What are your predictions about the future of Islamism in the West and in the United States?
Well, I think the Salafi crowd, they need to be more organized. I don't think they have the structure that the Muslim Brotherhood has, the likes of CARE, the MSA, MAS, ISNA, ICNA, all this stuff. So they're fully entrenched. I don't see an upset happening anytime soon of some of these, underdog Islamist movements coming out of nowhere. I think a lot of those are more localized. I think their numbers are smaller, but I don't see it happening anytime soon, to be honest. And I think, again, the political inroads that the Muslim Brotherhood has made with the Democratic Party is massive, absolutely massive. And it's happening at the very, very top.
All right, thank you. Now, I suppose I will close with this question. Um, Now, through your journey, kind of being not recruited, but kind of put in the service of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist organizations, and your subsequent disavowal and moving away from them, what are some of the lessons that you could draw from your experience that the rest of us can maybe learn from you?
Very good question. And I hate to be a pessimist, but be skeptical. Understand that groups, entities have political objectives. So encouraging people to think about the potential political implications of their allyship, right? Their social justice efforts. It was mentioned in the description of this event, like all is not what it seems. And like that is true. So do your homework, be cautious, interact with people though, engage. I'm not telling anyone to be timid. and to be reserved, go out there. It's America. You have the opportunity to do that. Thank God. So go out there, do your thing, but also do your homework. And in doing your homework, make sure you're not just reading from one political tribe. Make sure to read across the aisle. Read everything, not just Fox or CNN. Read both, and do your homework, and then you can make a sound decision. And then also, and this is going back to my previous point about just being an individual, uh, uh, don't feel like you need to be inherently attached to any group because of who you are or what you believe in. Be yourself. That's most important.
Well, thank you. That is very sound advice. I wish myself and other people when I was in college took that to heart. But at any rate, we thank you, Dr. Considine, for joining us. This has been a fantastic discussion. We have more questions than I am even able to scroll through and read. I wish we could get to all of them. But for our viewers and audience, is there somewhere where they can go where they can follow more of your work?
Yeah, I'm on pretty much all the social media except for TikTok. Refuse to get on TikTok for obvious reasons. But um, I'm working on a book, about to sign a contract, hopefully in the next few days. But it's going to look at the intersection and the relationship between Marxism and Islamism in the United States. It's been written about before, like David Horowitz has written about it. Asra Nomani just wrote about it, this unholy alliance. But I'm going to write about it from a sociological perspective and also include some of my own personal experiences. So I'd encourage folks to be on the lookout for that. I'll be sharing more information about it. But I appreciate everyone being there. And if anyone who is listening, if you have more questions, you can email me.
All right, great. Thank you. We'll be on the lookout for that upcoming book. If you are watching this on the future recording on our YouTube page, I will be sure to link Dr. Considine's social media account to the video description here. And for all of you watching, please be on the lookout for our Israel Insider podcast this Wednesday at 3 p.m. with Ashley Perry. And as always, I thank you all again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.